Hello everyone, and welcome back to my first time reading Bleach. So we ended the last chapters with Soul Society finally sending some captains to help handle the Espada in Hueco Mundo. That was an incredible surprise and set up battles against Aizen's army, which was just an exciting thing to leave off on because there are so many potentially cool fights to have here. So I'm going to tackle these matchups one by one. I want to make sure I give these clashes their due, and in this video, we're starting with Captain Unohana versus the Hueco Mundo Janitors, or Personal Execution Squad, or whatever they really are. We're starting with this fight. Oh wait, never mind. Why was Kubo getting me hyped for that, only to take it away from me before it even began? There's a couple of possibilities of why this happened this way. 1. Unohana claimed that they weren't there to fight, only to heal the wounded. This makes sense with what we've seen of her so far in the series. Even when confronted by Aizen, she's more of a healer than a fighter, so maybe Kubo didn't want to give her a big fight and instead focus on her role as a healer. Fair enough. Or maybe these guys that seem to be Aizen's personal cleanup team don't want to have to fight people that haven't already been injured and exhausted and are already almost dying. Like, maybe they're not even meant to deal with people that are wounded on the floor. Or maybe they just respect that medics are supposed to be off limits on the battlefield, but I highly doubt Arancars in Hueco Mundo have ever heard of that. Or maybe they have. Maybe Hueco Mundo's warfare is pretty civil. Doubtful. I don't know, but I'm a little sad that we don't get to see this. Those guys bounced real quick though. But just let me see Unohana throw down sometime. Let me see her defeat someone with her giant flying manta ray sword. I'm not asking for much, I want to see it, Kubo. But okay, fine. That's one less confrontation to have to worry about. So let's talk about the actual first fight that we really get to see, and that actually happens. And that's Byakuya versus Zomari. It wasn't a bad fight, but I was slightly underwhelmed by this battle, and I'm not sure if it's the fight itself that's at fault for that. It just kind of pales in comparison to all of the amazing ones that we've been getting lately in a very specific way. Hear me out. Between Rukia versus Eren, including all kinds of emotional mind games, or Grimmjow versus Ichigo being the culmination of their tense rivalry, or most recently, everything between Nell and Neutra and all of their history. There's just been these personal conflicts mixed into all of these duels in some form or another. This, as far as the things happening between the two fighters, it's a little bit light on stakes and emotions, and it kind of just comes down to, you're arrogant. No, I'm not arrogant, you're arrogant. No, you, no, you, no, you. I don't know. Maybe I've just been a little spoiled during this part of the arc. Yeah, it's not a bad fight by any means, but it's just lacking a little bit of oomph for me. Let's look at the combatants themselves. Maybe that'll shed some light on my feelings a little bit. They're both very reserved individuals. Quiet, stoic, serious. Can make it a little bit uninteresting that there's not really these big personalities clashing. It's just two kind of quiet people being mad at each other. But anyway, let's look at the fighters. Byakuya hasn't been a personal favorite of mine, probably because I found him to be so frustratingly straight-laced in the Soul Society arc, but in retrospect, that was the point back then. He was the antagonist at the time, and he eventually started to see that he may have been going about things in the wrong way. And I've enjoyed him slowly starting to evolve into someone that's not so tied down by the laws and the regulations, and especially how he's changed in regards to Rukia. He's just loosened up a bit over time, which I appreciate, but he's never been one of my absolute favorites, at least not so far. But currently, especially throughout these chapters, Byakuya is growing on me, and I think that's exactly what Kubo intended for him to do. If that's the case, then it's working, and I hope he'll keep developing until I really love this character. Now, on to his opponent, Zomari. Right off the bat, I'm just going to say it, I'm just going to get it out of the way. Okay? I know we're all thinking it. But I finally got an Espada number right. Finally! So far, when it comes to me guessing Espada numbers, I'm 0 for 4. But finally, I got one. Yes, I guessed that this man was ranked as number 7, and it turns out he is. After how close I've been, and in some cases, not close at all, this just made me feel so good for a little bit. It's also funny because my wife also thought Zamari was number 7. It's just his vibe, I guess, lucky number 7. But yeah, this is kind of a historic day for me in a way, and I'm very proud of myself for actually getting at least one of these rankings right. I honestly wasn't sure that I hadn't completely mixed up the whole thing. I thought I just scrambled everything beyond saving. I wasn't gonna get any of them, but do I wish it was for a character that I enjoyed more? Sure, but I'll take what I can get, so let's appreciate that little victory, so now we can actually talk about Zomari as a character. So when I first saw the Espada and gave my initial impressions, I talked about how he kind of didn't stand out in any interesting ways at the table, at least design-wise, and unfortunately, even after now seeing him in action, I think my gut was spot on with that. Zamari just feels underdeveloped as a character compared to his peers, at least the ones that I've gotten to know so far. I don't expect every Espada to be extremely interesting or fleshed out, or have these deep, intricate personalities, or need to be multi-dimensional even. Bleach is a big story with a lot of characters and a lot of moving parts doing a lot of different things. But there should have been something, whether it's something deep, or intriguing, or entertaining, or memorable, something. Eren Yarrow didn't have much depth character-wise, but it was his horrific actions and how he affected Rukia that made him such a successful antagonist for his small portion of the story. Hell, Xyloporo's fight is still ongoing, but he's already displayed so much more terrifying personality than this. He's just so much more memorable. I'm gonna remember Xyloporo, years from now, I'm sure. And when I look back, I'm not sure I can say the same for Zamari. He's just missing something. Even Grimjow and Neutra also have huge personalities that speak to the more human sides of Hollows, for better or worse. And Ukiura, while passive on the surface, has such a memorable, just general demeanor. You remember his frown. You remember him calling people trash. Whereas Zomari he's just kind of boring, unfortunately. And that's not inherently a bad thing. It could work. Some people are uninteresting in life. That just happens. In many groups, there is probably someone that is less interesting or quieter or just kind of bland. It's not necessarily a negative for his character to be like this. It could be played in an interesting way. Among the likes of really evil and twisted monsters like Eren Yarrow or Neutra or Xyloporo, Zomari seems generally pretty chill. He doesn't seem to relish the violence or the pain he causes, and if explored more, how different he is could have been brought up, but it wasn't. Instead, the character just feels already a bit forgettable immediately. And I just read these chapters and watched the episodes, and he's already kind of fading, slowly from my mind. While Zomari is absolutely pretty unremarkable, admittedly, he's not great as a character. I think his apparent stoicism worked well as a reflection of Byakuya's own personality, because Byakuya was kind of like this in the Soul Society arc, at least for me. Among all of those more boisterous personalities he was around, he was just kind of the quiet one, doing as he was told and carrying out things in a very stone-faced way. I wish this confrontation played with that angle a bit more directly, but it was a nice little bit of subtext, the difference being that Zomari didn't have that extra bit of backstory and dynamics that Byakuya had with Rukia or Renji or Ichigo. So maybe Zomari's abilities could make up for his uninteresting personality, yeah? Well, he kind of talks a big game about being the fastest Espada, and I was actually looking forward to seeing more of that. Speedsters can be awesome, but this kind of immediately dropped in favor of Kubo showing us Zomari's release transformation. And it's something. I must have stared at this panel for 2 to 3 minutes, just trying to process what I was seeing and why I was seeing it. Tite Kubo is one of the best character designers. He usually manages to convey so much with the appearance that he gives a character, or his visual choices really capture something interesting in their own right. besides all of that, so many of his character designs are just cool looking. Like, they're pleasant to look at. But this, I don't know what this is. It's interesting, for sure, but to me, it's just super goofy and kind of deflates any threat this character could have had, personally. It's just such an uncharacteristic fumble for Kubo to draw someone looking like this. But I'm sure he had his reasons. I'm sure he was going for something. I just don't think it works. And that's wild, considering how perfect his designs usually are. Still, the man is human, and not every shot can be a slam dunk. I just really don't like this look. Zomari is supposed to be the fastest Espada, right? So why is his resurrection a transformation that takes away his legs? It doesn't really complement the initial thing we learned about him. It's just goofy looking. I'm sorry, it's goofy looking. It turned the lower half of his body into a pincushion or a pumpkin, and I don't know why. Eren Yero's transformation was kind of similar in some ways, I guess, since he also turned his lower half into something else, but at least he turned his into like a giant gooey tentacle monster, and not this. I don't know, guys. It's just a hard thing to get past for someone that's supposed to be intimidating. Like, thankfully, his powers in this state are interesting enough to almost make up for the weird design. Zomari's covered in eyes, and he can control the body of anyone that he looks at by tagging portions of their body with his sight. The power itself was kind of creepy and potentially extremely dangerous and overpowered, but I really liked how Byakuya adapted to this kind of attack. His analytical, pragmatic side was really put to good use. The second his own limbs were being turned against him, he severed his own muscles to make sure his limbs couldn't move. That was hardcore and really smart, and I loved it. But one of the highlights for me in these chapters was how protective Byakuya was of Rukia. It's just sweet to see, after how he used to be willing to let her be executed, now he goes out of his way to make sure she's safe, and is low-key furious that someone is trying to harm her. He doesn't flip out, but you can feel it simmering in him to see her in danger. It's just nice to see that change, and it warms my heart to actually see him being an older brother figure. Byakuya himself was just so cold and badass throughout this whole thing, never sweating, and even when he seemed like he was at a disadvantage, he was certain that he'd win. Zomari considered that arrogance, and that's a big, backbone in this fight, is this idea of which of these two is being more arrogant. But it felt more like Byakuya was just very aware of the truth, of the difference in power between himself and his opponent. Another part of this confrontation that I really liked was after Byakuya's Bankai absolutely wrecks Zomari pretty easily, they had a last conversation. And it was when Zomari started voicing a perspective that might have made him more interesting if he expanded on this, or it wasn't one of the literal last things he will ever say. He questioned Soul Reapers and their place in the world, asking why it was that they really hunted hollows, or what gave them the right to cast judgment and protect humans. To hear a hollow ask these kind of questions could have potentially opened up some fun philosophical debates, but Byakuya wasn't having it. He pulled off the same move he used to beat Ichigo the first time. The kind of delayed slash kind of move. I'm not a big wrestling guy, but this feels like it's meant to be Byakuya's crowd-pleasing finisher. It was pretty awesome to see that again. And Zomari's final moments are pretty pathetic. He's just shouting, "Bonsai! Bonsai! Bonsai!" over and over, and essentially proclaiming his devotion to Aizen even at the very end. It wasn't the most respectable way to go, but it falls in line with how Eren Yero was at his end too. Some of these Espada are so beholden to Aizen, even at the end when he can't help them and he's not coming to save them. They'll cry out for him, or they'll praise him. It's a little sad. Have some self-respect, guys. I think it's pretty obvious that I won't miss Zomari much. He was fine as an enemy for Byakuya to fight for a few chapters, but otherwise, he definitely could have been better. to the point where I thought even like Dordoni, a former Espada, that doesn't even have one of the top 10 numbers anymore. Dordoni was more interesting and more entertaining than the number 7 Espada. I don't know, he was just very underwhelming and a bit of a disappointment. Still, I guessed his Espada number right, so at least I'll always have that. Thank you, Zamari. Goodbye. So I'll take that little victory as Byakuya takes his, and next time, we'll get into the battle between the nerds. And considering who both of these characters are, this is going to be a much more interesting fight. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Let me know what you thought of Zumari or his design. Am I completely off base? Or if you're a fan of him, or this transformation somehow, please let me know why. I'd love to hear some other perspectives, because between us all, we got a whole lot of eyes seeing a whole lot of things. Hope you all have a great day. Take care. I'll see you next time.